the vice president of the club, and today serving as the facilitator for a couple of sessions that I'm really looking forward to. Before we jump in, a few brief housekeeping announcements that many of you will have heard yesterday. The first of those is our antitrust disclaimer. We, as the Actuaries Club of the Southwest, are committed to adhering to antitrust statutes. We, well, you can. I'll leave the text up there. You can you can read it for a second or two, but important to set that out. In terms of other housekeeping items, if your email address is not current with our club, please shoot us a note either to myself, to Alex Santiago, to make sure that we can continue to be in contact with you and notify you about any updates for future meetings. With respect to today's call, please stay muted and have your video turned off unless you are a presenter or need to ask a question in real time. Typically, we would ask you to utilize the chat box for any questions. We found that tends to work a little bit more smoothly in terms of managing the questions as they come in and having the presenters field those questions. And if there are any technology issues or questions, please direct message Richard Wu or Kathleen Swain. So with that, we're going to jump right in to the first of today's presentations. Kevin Pledge is the founder and CEO of Acceptive. Kevin has been a serial entrepreneur since 2000, currently specializing in online distribution solutions for insurance organizations. Kevin has founded 3 companies, purchased 1, sold 2 of these, and wound 1 up. Prior to founding his own company, Kevin held senior roles at insurance companies in the UK and North America. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen and I will let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out where is the screen share. It's around here somewhere. I'll share the slides and okay, I'm either sharing the whole screen or the appropriate window. So you should be able to see the title slide. And
yes,
let me see if I can progress from the title slide. There we go. Okay, so yes, thank you, Colin, for that introduction. I'm Kevin Pledge. My area of work is primarily in automated underwriting, so it's sort of a technology area that I've always worked in. So most of my comments will be geared, influenced at least by that environment. I'm joined by 2 speakers today, so I'm going to moderate and speak or throw my own comments in. I'm joined by Andy Smith and Ian Duncan. We're going to ask them to introduce themselves, and if they want to come on camera, they're more than welcome to, or stay off, whatever we're most comfortable with. If you do have questions, as we say, please pop them in the chat. Unless we do something like an acronym and you need an immediate answer, then just come off mute and shout at us. And we'll try to get through the whole agenda. You'll see the agenda on the next slide. But if we focus more on getting started, we'll just keep and go with the flow. So that's my sort of introductory. If there's anything people particularly want covered, please put that in the chat to make sure we get to it. I'm going to start by introducing Andy Smith. Andy Smith is the co-founder and CEO of Slope Software. I can't remember how long I've known Andy for, a number of years. And Andy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here today to present with all of you. And as Kevin said, I am the co-founder and CEO of Slope Software. I've been doing that for the last 8 years. And for those of you that don't know, Slope Software is a valuation and modeling platform provided as a software as a service model, fully cloud native, doing valuation, pricing, cash flow testing, ALM type stuff for life insurance, annuities, pensions, and other long-term type contracts. Before starting this company, I worked in a more traditional role in the insurance industry, working at TIA CREF, and later at SCORE on the reinsurance side, doing valuation, modeling, financial reporting for my career before starting this company.
Thanks, Andy. And Ian, Ian Duncan, the person with more letters after his name than in his name. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I've known Kevin for many years. We're both fellows of the Institute in London. But I've changed countries a number of times, and each time I change countries, I have to requalify, which is annoying. And then when you qualify by writing exams, you don't give it up. I've found. Anyway, I'm a health actuary, have been one for 40-something years. Over my career, the last 25 years, have founded or co-founded 5 companies, sold 2 of them. Currently running 2 companies. One is the consulting company, Santa Barbara Actuaries, and the second is a software company that we started 2 years ago to commercialize our intellectual property from the consulting business. The consulting that we do is all around healthcare data and healthcare data analytics, with a special focus on value-based contracting for providers.
Thank you, Ian. So the topic today is around growing a company. Ian and I were on a panel that covered this topic, and it followed another session that talked about starting a company. We're going to just basically work through a number of topics. There's no additional slides other than to prompt us to stay on track, and cover each of these topics from our own personal experience. And I guess that's our personal caveat. This is our own experience. Someone else could have very different experience and be equally valid with that. So let's start with getting started. And Andy, let me pick on you to give an example of how did you start Slope, and tell us about that.
Yeah, so the idea for the company itself of building an actuarial modeling platform really grew out of my personal job experience working in the industry, is how it initially came. So I worked with more traditional platforms that have been around for decades, Profit, Access, MG Alpha, things like that, and found myself growing frustrated in my day-to-day job, which ultimately led to the idea of, I want to have something better than this. And I'll really admit that it was the fact that I couldn't shake the idea from my head for a very long period of time that ultimately led me to saying, all right, let me give this an actual try and try to build this out. And I went to a personal friend that I've known for a very long time that had a background in IT software development, and ran the idea by him to really kind of pitch this idea of the entire company when I was getting started and say, is this viable? Is it possible? What's it going to take to actually do this and build a proper software system that we can go out and sell to companies in the future? And even after hearing the answer to that, which was a long time, still decided that I wanted to do this. And that kind of led me down the path of, all right, well, now I want to try building a product, start vetting this idea, and start building something out there in the industry off of that idea from me. And I really did it as a side project to start. I was not quite ready to jump in with both feet from day one. I think it was more than a year into actually building a product before I left my regular full-time job to pursue this more fully from that.
Yeah, good points that I want to follow up on. But let's, Ian, do you want to tell us how you've started maybe your latest venture, or do you want to go back further?
No, I'll go back to the first company. The first company we started with a friend of mine from my Pricewaterhouse days. Really got started because the tools towards the end of the 1990s, we were beginning to find that there were tools to access large medical claims databases, which hadn't been available 10 years previously. 10 years previously, we were doing work with mainframe computers, but the computing changes at the end of the 90s really allowed us to do much better work, much more timely work. And the predictive modeling, I guess what later became a major movement into predictive modeling, had started about the mid-1990s. And we were early on the predictive modeling side for healthcare. What was interesting was we found that we couldn't sell models. And so what we ended up doing was developing software that took the results of the models and distributed them to nurses and care managers who were then intervening with populations in healthcare plans. So really the company got its value from the software that we developed rather than from the models themselves.
Did you just start that by yourself or with a partner?
No, with a partner, somebody that I had with.
Yeah, so my first company I also started with a partner, and I think that's one of the biggest regrets I have, starting things on equal terms. So subsequent companies, it's always been a lot clearer who, even if it's 51%, 49%, having that clarity, I've always found an important aspect of a company. Things evolve and things change. Andy, is yours 50-50?
Mine is 50-50 because we really started with nothing and working out together. Fortunately, it was someone that I had a very long relationship with on a personal basis, not so much on a business basis that I had known before this. And we did have a conversation up front about expectations and rules, and really kind of laid out the working relationship before we got started, which I think was really important for the way that we've managed it since then. I will add the one thought that even if you specify all of that and who owns it, having more than one person when you start is really, really valuable for building a company. I think if I had tried to do this on my own, there's no way that I would have ever succeeded.
Yeah, I think we'll get to that with resources, because obviously partners can do this and as a side gig, as you said. So you mentioned it was a side project. Was yours a side project, Ian?
No.
No.
This company was a full-time project. The next, and in fact, with the exception of my latest company, the latest consulting company, which I started while I was still a professor at the university, all companies have been full-time. I'm not really in favor of side gigs. I think they don't, you've got too many other distractions. I think if you really want to get the company started and moving and do the right thing, you've got to give your full-time attention to it. I was fortunate with the latest company because I started it because clients kept coming back asking for stuff. So I started the company. And then one of my former students that I was close to, who'd gone to work for Towers Watson, called me up one day and said, I want to come and work for you. So he started as a full-time employee and basically is the chief operating officer of the company, allowing me to continue to teach at the university part-time. So but I'm not in favor of part-time. I'm really in favor of full-time.
And that's we discussed this before, and the challenge if you do it as a side project is not just managing your time, but understanding where that break is legally. There's challenges there. So I know, I have some experience of someone who's built some software in his own time on the weekends. It might have been using the company's computers, but he came back and said, look, I'm going to do this. And the response from the CEO was, well, we already own it because you're employed by us and everything you do as a work product is owned by us. So there's always an issue of clarity and getting that smooth exit. And anything from your experience, Andy, that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, that is something, it is something you have to be very careful of fully separating. And I will add, when I started out as a side gig, it was really the time it took for us to properly validate the idea that we knew that we had something before actually leaving from my regular job to pursue this full time. And I'll agree with Ian, you're not going to get the company fully off the ground doing this as a side project. It wasn't until I had left that job after we'd done the validation steps and the proper market research to validate the idea that I knew that there was going to be something here, that's when I left my regular job, pursued it full time. And that's really when the company started to move and started to have results, was after that point.
The most important part of getting started is finding your first customer. And that is something you cannot do as a side gig, by the way. So How did you find your first customer, guys? Let's start with Ian.
I'll disagree with you slightly there, Kevin. I obviously the first customer is really important, but so is a good lawyer. Because I had the experience with my second company, starting it with another colleague from Price Waterhouse, and honestly, he wanted too much, and we fell out. So not only did I lose a partner, but I also lost a friend, and ended up with that company on my own. But I've always somewhat regretted not getting lawyers involved in agreements sooner, and I've always sort of put it off because you have to pay them real money. But I do think they're really important. But very often the first customer is just complete luck. They come along sort of unexpectedly. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I have to tell you, money in the door is more important than money out of the door. But Andy, tell us what you think. You could be the tiebreaker and tell us how you found your first customer.
Yeah, I'd say it was a little bit of luck, but also putting myself out there. So I started out just reaching out to consulting firms and other people that I had known through my career. I went to one of the actuarial conferences and I walked around with basically nothing more than a business card and an idea, and pitching the idea to people and seeing who thought it might be interesting to take a look. And off of those initial conversations, I think it was probably 6 to 12 months after those initial conversations that I was able to finally get a conversation going and getting the first paying client onto the platform. A lot of people were really interested in the idea earlier. Getting someone interested to pay me for it was a whole different story, though.
And yeah, so I joke a little bit. I think one of the most important things is having good professional advisors and set everything up right from day one. I have recently found a website, and when I'm not sharing my screen, I'll switch and find it and share that with everyone that actually can guide you through some of that. It's obviously a cheaper way of doing it now that they can say, yeah, we can help you issue equity, we can help you do your shareholder agreements and stuff like that. So there are services that are a lot easier now than I guess when we started. But yeah, where do you, Ian's obviously on the side of the fence of get good advisors day one. And I do agree with him on that. I've seen conferences where people have said, no, money's tight, do what you need to do and put it in the product or put it in your development. But I think you need a good firm foundation. It's easy to say after the fact, but where do you sit on that one, Andy?
Kevin, something that's coming up later is intellectual property. And I think that's something that gets overlooked when you're starting out.
Yeah.
That you've got to get that nailed down legally.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you. And actually, the one place where I'm going to say if you're going to spend any money is on legal counsel. That's one that you've got to get right really early, and can end up costing you a significant amount later if you don't do the diligence early on. And this is a situation where as soon as you have more than one person involved in the company, it's really, really important to get that in place. And the intellectual property stuff for us as a company, before we get to our second topic, it came up before we got to the venture capital fundraising side of things, that we had to have all of that really squared away before serious money could be invested into the company.
Right. Well, let's move to fundraising, and we can jump around these, but you'll notice I've done nice animation of the arrows. So, fundraising. So yeah, my first company was basically self-funded, but I did have a customer out of the door who was fantastic. It was actually our co-presenter from the previous time we did this. So I don't know if I said how great it was, but they basically said, you know, we'll pay you to take what you know, develop something, you keep the IP, and you're basically getting money from us as you develop it. So that was kind of a dream, and I actually left the meeting and had to email myself that conversation because I would not believe it the next day. And then after that, it's the fundraising, Mike's fundraising experience. I think yours was the same, Ian. There's when you need the money, there's no one there offering it, and when you don't need it, they come in buckets.
Yeah, I have generally bootstrapped and self-funded, because consulting companies generate revenue, so there really isn't a huge need. Once you get into the software development, my second company, we developed software as well, and that's really why we were able to sell that company. Consulting companies don't fetch a premium and aren't all that interesting to investors, but software is, and we, in both the first two companies, developed software sort of on the side. This company, the current company, the same kind of model, developing software internally with me funding it, is proving to be much too challenging. And in talking to VCs and private equity, the fact that it's a software company inside a consulting company is really, really difficult for them to get their minds around. So we're in the process of splitting the companies and hiring separate management for the software company, because that's what the VCs want to invest in. Times are challenging at the moment. There used to be a lot of money behind healthcare software and healthcare IT, but the money has dried up to some extent. It's still there, but it's much harder to find at the moment.
Andy, what's your experience?
Yeah, so I'm primarily a software company. I'm going to agree with you in that there's a lot of money out there for software company ideas, and we are a venture capital backed company. So I've been through the process of raising funds, both from private investors, from venture capital, from corporate investors, across all of that. And it is a tough environment right now. I think following the rising interest rates and changes in kind of macroeconomic things that are happening right now, it's been fairly tight, although I would also argue that it's more or less reset itself to what it was more than 5 to 7 years ago in the investment world. Money was flowing a little ridiculously in 2019 through 2021, 2022 into investments at almost ridiculous valuations for companies throughout that. So it's at a point now where it's back to what it was maybe a decade ago from investment. It is a whole different world going out and fundraising for a company. And for those that have never done it, it's like having a second full-time job on top of your regular full-time job of running a company to go out and properly do a fundraising effort.
So yeah, I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing some of the lessons in sort of putting together the pitch deck and what investors are looking for. Is there any sort of special secret sauce or something you really need to do first? I know you mentioned it's squaring up the IP. What are they looking for? What is it that you can do and what people can learn from?
Actually, the IP and the legal stuff came during the diligence point, which was fairly late into the fundraising process. It was after all the initial discussions. I was fortunate enough to be able to be part of an accelerator program that was run by Techstars and funded by MetLife back in 2019. And through that, I got a lot of the information about the fundraising process in general. And what I've learned from this is, one, there are a lot of investors out there, but finding the right one in there is like finding a needle in the haystack. It's really about finding someone who agrees with your idea, is excited about it, and is also willing to invest in that particular area. And for early companies, when you're first getting started, your product really doesn't matter that much. At that point in a company, what most of the investors are investing in, and they'll call this either pre-seed funding or seed level funding, very early in the company, you might not have any customers yet. They're really looking at the founders of the company and what is the initial team that you have built around this idea. And they are more investing in the people than the actual company and the idea. If they find really smart people that are capable, willing to learn, willing to ideate and move through variations on their idea, that's what they're looking from an investment standpoint at that point. It's not until you get into bigger customers where the actual company and the revenues and all of that matters, because we got our first couple of investments when we had virtually no customers. I think we had 3 customers on the platform when we got our first venture capital money into the platform. Definitely not a cash flow positive company when we first got it invested.
And I guess the other thing is now with cloud computing, it's a lot cheaper to do cloud computing. It's a much more level playing field. So
yeah, it makes it very easy to start a company with cloud services. You don't need the big capital investment into hardware or capital. It's really people investment is where all the money goes.
And there are programs associated with those, like I can't remember what they call it now. Microsoft had one called BizSpark that I was involved in starting. AWS has one, so that they will give you an amount of credits for getting on their platform for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it's pretty significant amounts. There's a Microsoft for startups, there's an AWS for startups, there's a Google for startups, and they will all give you, $100,000, $200,000 of cloud credits for a startup program to build and get you onto their platform, because they want to get a company that's going to grow fast and get them stuck on their particular cloud providers. So they're willing to put some investment up front.
Yeah, and working with them, I think, is well worthwhile if you're in that space. Getting to know their sales teams as well. You can actually get to know them, and they can be quite useful. Yeah, and before I move on, I just want to mention the Society of Actuaries does have InsurTech initiatives. So I think they have a meeting this week at InsurTech Insights, where they're matching the hosting social events. They will have another one in September at InsurTech Connect. So if anybody on this webinar wants to is looking at fundraising, there are resources and connections available through the Society of Actuaries. So I'll move on to the next section, and some of these we'll discover that we've already touched on, because I think Andy, you and Ian as well, you both mentioned having co-founders, and that's obviously the cheapest resource you can get day one. Someone is prepared to share the risk and the reward. Do you want to add any other thoughts on co-founders?
I think in the actuarial space, that's pretty straightforward, because lots of people and you can probably find people. Although, by the way, my impression of the actuarial job market at the moment is it's very tight and quite expensive. Interestingly, back in the mid 2000s, when I had the previous company, I think job market was pretty poor for a number of actuaries, and a number of actuaries in the E&I section, Kevin, had sort of left their companies or been fired from their companies and started out as sole practitioners or sole consultants, and did that maybe for a while and then went back to a corporate job. But the big challenge I've always found is hiring the first person, because it takes you from it's really a different mindset. It's a mindset where you're now responsible for people's livelihood and people's futures, and by association, their families and children and everything else. So that's a big step to take, is hiring your first full-time person.
Yeah, I agree with that, Andy.
Yeah, I fully agree with that as well. It was, now, my co-founder was actually not an actuary. He came from the software development space and was a personal contact of mine that I had known for years. So he had also been in startups before, so that was good experience to be able to find someone like that.
That's been a real challenge for us on the latest software company, because none of us really has that kind of IT software development background, and trying to find somebody to be a co-founder in Silicon Valley, California, which is where we're located, is both very difficult and very expensive. So we've really not been able to find the right person to help us on the software development company side.
Yeah, when I started my first company, I wanted to start with 3 co-founders, and the IT person dropped out, so that left us having to hire. So we mentioned non-actuaries. Hiring actuaries is pretty straightforward for us, and I imagine most people would know other actuaries, apart from the challenge that Ian raises of, yes, you're convincing someone to come and work for you, and now you've got a responsibility for them. No matter how you look at it, you're responsible for keeping the lights on and paying their salary. When it comes to hiring non-actuaries, one thing that we have is a good solid credential, and you can hire someone, you look at the credential and they've passed the rigorous exams, and you can talk to them and learn about their experience. Non-actuaries are more of a challenge. I always rely on IT credentials. We typically look to the Microsoft credentials when we're hiring people. They've been around the longest and they're the most solid, from what I see. And so often I'll have someone come to me and say, hey, is this person such and such? They might not have the credentials, but they're really good. They did this, they did that, and they did that. And I personally will not trust that. I will not take them on board. And we require our developers to continue doing the credentials. What your experience, Andy? I guess you've got a.
So this is kind of interesting. With buying the technical staff was also fairly easy for us because I had someone who came from a technical background for the situation. The places where I have really struggled hiring is sales and marketing for the company, which is an area that, again, doesn't have credentials and doesn't have this. What I have found to work best for us is to build a trusted network of people that knows other people. And it's really personal recommendations have been the best way to find it. And then how you continue to grow that staff once you have them, continuous education, putting them towards additional credentials, I think is a really good area. And I also wanted to add a quick comment on something Ian said about, having trouble finding technical people. The VCs that I've known and I've met have been a good resource for finding people that will go out and be willing to take that risk. They might know people that have started companies before that might be looking for a co-founder status within a company, and have experience growing and building from the ground up, which is a very different experience than working IT in a large corporation. It's a totally different job. It's a totally different function. And there's also
with being an actuary.
That's very true. Very true being an actuary at a small company. The other interesting thing about going and talking to VC or PE firms about asking for resources, there's a phrase in the fundraising world, if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And it's very, very true. If you go to a VC and you say, I'm not asking you for money out of your fund, I want to know if you know people. I'm looking for resources. I'm looking for advice on this. And if they bring someone into your company that they know and they trust well more than you, they're much more likely to invest in your company as a result of that relationship that they already have with the prior individual as well. So it's actually a very good way to go about the initial fundraising if you're looking for resources and looking to build out, especially that initial co-founder team for a company, to go out and ask the VCs and ask the investors for people that they know before you go back and ask them for money.
I've never heard that expression. I think it's a very good one.
It's our takeaway from this session.
And it's very true. I've asked a lot of VCs for money and I've gotten a lot of words of advice in return for that.
So yeah, the analogy, we do get people through recommendations, but I do require the credentials. I find that that's fundamental. It's like you meet a lot of people that say, well, I'm not an actuary, but I can do the pricing, I can understand it. And the same is the same is true of IT. People can say they can do it, but can they really? And do they have the understand the security infrastructure and all the things you need around that? So I think we'll be touching on that a little bit when you come to some of the other topics. But let's talk about marketing, because we did say the hardest people to find are the marketing people. They're the ones that have the credential. And I'll share my my experience of being introduced to people from a VC. Is they said, oh, you've got to hire this person. Maybe he can do your marketing for you. No, he was the brother of an important investor that they wanted to keep happy. And so, yeah, my experience is take that with a pinch of salt if it's a personal recommendation from someone who could have a different interest. Understand, everyone's got their own interest here, and if it's clearly they want to make money from you, that's aligned, and you can understand that. But giving you an introduction to an investor's brother was not good for me.
Yeah, and it's very important to check the references and how they know someone when you're hiring someone. I do want to make one more comment on hiring as well. One thing that has been very important early in the hiring process is interviewing and hiring people for culture fit within the company. It is very easy to find someone who is capable, but will corrupt your company from the inside because of mindset or the way that they think about it, or just not aligned with the way that you want to run the company. And when you're early in your process, and there's only a handful of people in the company and you're hiring new leaders for the company, it is important that you find people that are really aligned with that long-term vision of the company. And so every hire that we've done for the company so far, we have had an interview session that is specifically for, are you the kind of person that I want to work with and that I want to be with this company for a long time?
I think that's good advice. Since we're talking about hiring, I'll add one more thing. Maybe because we're highly specialized in what we do, I don't trust credentials. We test everybody that we talk to as potential hires. They go through a full day of case studies to make sure that they actually do know what they say then.
Yeah, but you can't be shy about firing someone if they claim to be able to do something and they can't. That's you know, I feel a sort of paternal responsibility if we don't get the business in and we can't support promises that we've made. But if someone else can't support their promises, they're responsible for that.
Yeah, it is very much a situation of hire slow, fire fast with those types of, and the more senior they are, the slower you're hiring and the faster they have to prove themselves.
My approach to hiring, I think, is potentially different, which might be explain some of my experiences. But you know, I try to hire people that are not like me, people I might be uncomfortable with working, people that perhaps I don't get that. And bear in mind, we're doing something that's sort of consumer orientated, direct to consumer. So you do need that diversity to be successful. But then, yeah, there have been cases where it simply hasn't worked. But I don't go out of my way to hire people that I think is a culture fit. I want the culture to change. So I hear what you're saying, Andy. And I know you're developing software and you're turning up on time, putting the hours in, being prepared. There are certain culture stuff I do. You know, if someone says, "Hey, I'm off for the weekend," and you've got a big potential client meeting on the Monday morning, that's not the sort of thing you want to happen. But at the same time, I do try to look for, you know, the people that you think just surprise you when you've hired them. They just, because they have abilities that you just don't look for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since we're talking about sales, I'll say point number one, I have not hired a lot of salespeople, but I have never successfully hired a salesperson. They've all turned out to be disasters. But what's been interesting in the latest company is we've done no marketing at all. All of our business comes through referrals, some of it from VCs and private equity that we know, but a lot of it just comes from people I know, or referrals from other clients. Or what's been odd for me, I had not expected this, is how many people come to us through our website. It's really strange. I did not expect that.
Good keywords going on there. Yeah, so sales. Yeah, I've always been reluctant to hire salespeople, but I've had some fantastic salespeople, and I've had the disaster and not much in the middle. So
yeah,
you know,
I'm with you. I've had really, really good and really, really bad, and not so much in the middle. My issue though with salespeople is I think that they're not just there to sell. They're not just there to bring the client to you and then hand it off. That to me seems a bit scummy. I want someone who can be like an account manager, see that client, identify their needs, work with them, and understand really what you're doing at a deeper level than perhaps someone who says I'm a salesperson would want. So the first person I hired was referred to me from a VC, and they said you really should hire her. And we were struggling to sell our software. Was the
the price we set was, I think we went to about $150,000 for the license fee, and she said, "Oh, you'll get a lot more than that. How about we agree? You just pay me anything, a percent, 20% of anything above that." And she said, "I'll try to sell it for 400,000." And straight away, it was the easiest sell at that price. And so it wasn't just getting the money; it was also the way she built the relationship with the clients and understood their needs. And then I've had other people that have been actuaries, and they've it's been network marketing, but hiring someone who has got marketing credentials and that's what they think they do has never worked for me.
Yeah, our current head of marketing was not a marketing person that we brought in. I brought in someone actually to be outbound sales at first, and also do some internal reporting and analytics stuff for the company. So he's very much a jack of many trades. And what I found was that this person was just a really, really smart guy, able to figure stuff out and able to build relationships. It really mattered a lot more than the actual credentials, and someone who's able to learn that on the job has been much more valuable to me than going out and finding someone with quote unquote marketing background or marketing resources, because the external hires that we've tried to bring in or third-party firms that we've tried to use have greatly missed the mark for us on what we wanted from a sales and marketing approach.
Yeah. When we spoke before, Ian shared a marketing approach, or a good tip. I don't know if Ian knows where I'm heading with this, but having an advisory board.
Yes, I think that's actually been valuable for us in the current company. I'm very lucky to have good advisors. So far, they're unpaid. They just have they have some stock grants, but that's been useful, and they're definitely committed to helping us in different ways. So advisory board's been great.
Yeah, and I think the old adage is, in a small company, everybody is the salesperson. So even when you're when you're selling actuarial services, having your staff go to the meeting, they might not be there to sell, but you've got good staff. People see them. That reflects on you, reflects on your company. Not that they're salespeople. They're there to do what they do, but to learn and just meeting colleagues and is in itself I think quite a good way to go about it.
Yeah.
Let's move to the next topic, which isn't advancing for me. Working with large companies. So you get started and then one of the hurdles we sort of have as a common experience is you get a large company and it introduces a ton of new issues. Andy or Ian, do you want to kick off with any things you've experienced? Or do you want me to share my list? Security, procurement, dealing with the procurement department, security requirements. We go through that. Where's your SOC 2 compliance?
Some of that's going to be true in any company, especially compliance and security. But I think one of the things that happens with large companies is they operate on a different time scale to you and resource scale to you. And they'll wear you down because they can throw 10 resources at a problem and you're doing it part-time. And sometimes I wonder whether it's worth it trying to get these really large companies, because it just takes so much time, expense, and energy.
The issue with security that I find as you get to a larger company, it becomes a more and more segmented role. And so what you're dealing with someone who says, we don't want you to share medical data with advisors. I mean, you're dealing with the marketing department that says, this is going to be our process. They need the visibility. And so it's actually people within the client company contradicting each other and having and pulling in different directions. In a smaller company, I've always found you can get everybody together and address those differences.
The issue with medical data, it's so highly regulated, but what we've been doing over the last year or so is investing in something called high trust, which should theoretically get us to the point where anybody can give us medical data without going through a whole big song and dance on the regulatory side. The downside to it is it's probably cost me a couple of $100,000 to get certified so far, and we're not quite done. But it should make things easier when it's done.
Yeah, this is an area, intellectual data protection, data security type stuff has been a big issue in working with companies, especially if you're doing anything that's going to touch personally identifiable information, or PII, and certainly HIPAA data that's protected under health. You run into a lot of questions and a lot of roadblocks, and the more that you've done ahead of time to get ahead of that, you've got your SOC 2 compliance in place, you've got HIPAA compliance that has been audited by a third party, the easier those conversations get with that process. But certainly when you go into the large companies, I'm agree with Kevin that they work on a much different time scale. It is much slower than you would want as a small and nimble company. And a lot of times, even when they have processes in place, they don't even know what their own processes are. And the people that are working through them may not know what their processes are. So there's a lot of work that we do when selling and talking to larger companies of just, hey, this is what we see all the other companies do. You probably have this process too. Find me the right person that actually knows what we need to do as a next step to get through this and work through this. And this is another place, if you're going to work with large companies, you're going to need to have a legal counsel in place, because they are going to beat you down with legal red lines on every single legal agreement that you put in front of them, just because they can, or their lawyers feel that they need to get their salary earned, or I don't know what the driver is, but it's always been a long and complicated process. Yeah,
and as you get started, my experience has been that your contract gets butchered by the first company, and then again by the second. You know, you learn from what they give you feedback, and you take what's been adjusted, you've accepted their feedback, and then it still gets butchered again and again and again. And eventually you get something where they will come back and they just feel they have to comment. But for a larger company, I have a personal experience where we got on a call to review the contract, and it was something like our 5th or 6th client. And the CFO came on and said, I simply can't accept this comment on paragraph something or other that's there. And I looked at it and I said, that's not for me. There's there's another department in your company that made that comment. They want to change what you want is what we had originally, and what they want is the markup. That wasn't our markup. And just departments not talking to each other. It can be. Yeah, I've been there with the contracting, can be really brutal, and it's all segmentation, I think.
Yes, very much.
Now I see we got 12 minutes left, and we have a hard stop because there's another session afterwards. So I'm going to move on. If anybody on the call wants anything particular covered that we can answer, let's do that. But we've covered intellectual property, and I think I guess the issue is, how do you protect your IP? How do you do trademarks, patents? Andy, share what you do.
Yeah, so the intellectual property has been something that is really, really important, because this will feed into kind of 2 down about ultimately exit. If you ever want to sell a company, making sure that intellectual property ownership of the company is really well laid out is going to be extremely important. It seems like something you don't have to care about all that much early in the company, but it really is something that you should pay attention to. And from our perspective, it's really about all the employees that we've hired, including the founders, making sure there's very clear intellectual property ownership. And then in all of our contracts with our customers and any vendors that we work with, intellectual property is one of the things that we really focus on in all those legal agreements, to make sure it's very clear and very cleanly laid out. And there's no gray area about who owns what, and in particular, the company owning the intellectual property of the company itself.
Right. So I hear what you're saying. So let me just clarify, because I thought IP, we're thinking about patents, but the other thing is, you have someone working in your organization, they have an idea, you implement that idea. 2 years later, they want to start their own company doing a spin-off similar, and they say, I'm going to take that idea because it was my idea. Or you have a client that says, we want this built. You have to be very clear. You know, if you work for us, we own any intellectual property for everything that's built. And it goes back to one of my first comments about experience someone had in their own time, went and built something for an insurance company, and they said, no, we still own it. That was their, you know, you see it from both sides. The my personal experience with patents is that it is a painful, expensive process that I've just given up on personally.
Yeah, we have not gone through a patent process with any of our stuff because it hasn't seemed worthwhile. And especially when you get into the software world, I've looked at software patents. It is the most confusing process, and it's very expensive, and it's hard to justify what exactly you own at the end of that patent process, and
Right.
even harder to protect it and more expensive to protect it.
The advice I got from my IP lawyer was to file for a patent, because then you could say patent applied for, and he thinks that's as much protection as actually getting the patent.
I don't know. That might just be a marketing thing, right? Oh, I've got patents. That's always cool.
Yeah.
So Ian, did you last time you covered, and I want to be quick to give us a chance to talk about exiting. And I'm going to take my screen off, but let's move on to regulations. I'll see if I can find that the website that I was thinking about. But you were talking about employment, so keep this rant short if we can.
No, I'll just say that I think what I found, we have, I think, 23 employees. What I found with this company particularly is regulations are passed for much larger companies. And as a small company, you've got to comply with all this crap. It's expensive, it's time consuming. Our CFO is about to divorce me. It's just, you know, it's just incredible how much, and we have employees in multiple states. So then you've got to deal with multiple states. It goes on and on and on. And there's no sort of fast track or easy lane for small companies. And I think that's my biggest problem on the regulatory side. How many employees do you have, Andy?
We have 13 full-time employees, and it's a similar type of situation. We're in multiple states. We do use what's called a professional employer organization, or a PEO, to handle HR compliance and payroll for the company. And it is a little bit more expensive than doing it yourself. But we've also found that using an organization like that can help us on negotiation for group benefits for employees. And as a result of that, we've been able to balance out the cost of using an organization by what we're able to save on the benefits offerings by getting what are effectively large group rates for a small company.
I think we looked at that, but it was complicated or wasn't satisfactory because of the multi-state employee issue.
Yeah, there are certain ones that do it well and certain ones that don't do it well. And I've changed more than once over the years from one to another to find the right one that we're happy with.
So and the worst of all is the 401k plan, but we don't have time to go into all of those complications. Yeah. What is it, Kevin?
Sorry, yeah, well, I'm in Canada, so we don't have so many problems until we want to sell into the US, or we need employees in the US, and we have experienced that. That's going to be a challenge. So mark your cards, people, if you're starting a business. Okay, let's wrap up with exiting. And I guess, you know, I was talking to someone just the other day, a startup raising their first seed round, and he says, I would need to document my my exit strategy. I need that as part of the pitch. So is that your experience, Andy and Ian? You have to think about exiting before you even get started. Do people want to hear that and understand that story?
I have found that they want to know that there is an exit opportunity and what that would look like, and that you've considered it. But beyond that, having like a clear line has never been valuable for us. So they want to know, what would an exit look like? What are the types of people and relationships that we need to build over the years that we're initially constructing this company that there could be an exit opportunity for the venture capital firm, because ultimately, when you work with VCs, you've got to remember that they are still the middleman to someone else. They've got LPs that have invested into their funds, and then the VCs are investing that into companies, but ultimately they've got to provide returns to those that have invested in funds. And so they've got due diligence on their side to make sure that they know how they're going to get a return in the future. Whether or not that's a clear line is not always necessary. Probably the later stage you get, the clearer that needs to be. Right.
So just before we wrap up and we can talk, I wanted to find this site. I only came to it the other day. I don't know if you're familiar with this, either of you guys. It's gust.com, or I assume that's how you pronounce it. They basically have a startup program. They help you do your they help you through some of the documentation there. You can see your AWS credits. They're easy to come by. And various advanced things, but they have a number of agreements as you get bigger, to partner agreements and stuff like that. So I'm starting to see companies use this service, and I'm by no means endorsing it. I'm saying there are there's probably others, but something like this I find quite useful. Just as even if you got a lawyer advising you, you've got to double check on things. Various benefits they give, and this is like an online accelerator services. So not everything you need to use, but some things you can. So yeah. So any the last slide, the last comment we were going to have, like, guys, is it worth it? Is it, after all the problems we said, is it actually worth it?
So my advice that I give frequently when I do these talks is everybody should start a company at some point in their lives, because it always looks much easier when you're looking at it from the outside than it actually is. And it is an incredible learning experience. You learn it very, very quickly, and you make mistakes and you go along, but it is the most incredible learning experience. On the topic of exits, which I want to make one comment about, I didn't think too much about exits in any of the companies. In retrospect, unwisely, because I intend to keep working until I drop dead. And so it never occurred to me that I had to have a plan to exit. But the VCs and the private equity do want to know how you're going to exit from this thing and how they're going to make money. But I do think, I would say, back to your question, Kevin, it is absolutely worth it. It is an incredible learning experience. You meet so many good people along the way, and you actually have something to show for it, which you don't have necessarily if you're working for a big corporation.
Yeah. And
yeah, I would say that it's been worth it for me. My personal mindset, I never really fit in a big corporation. Today, I could never see myself going back to work for a big company again. I think I would literally drown inside of those companies if I tried to go back to it. And I'll agree that it's been a huge amount of learning that was required, which is both good and bad. It can be very, very stressful. It can be very, very wonderful. You will experience a wide range of emotions as a startup founder, sometimes in as little as a 1 hour period in a single day. But in the end, I do think it's worth it. And being my own boss and running my own company, there's a lot of pride in that that I've gained from this.
Yeah, it is a lot of pride and very rewarding. And but mental health is important as well. So keep it balanced, guys. Look, we're right out of time. I make us right on the hour. Kathleen, is there any closing things that you need to add? Or Colin? Sorry, Colin.
Oh, no worries. No closing items. For me, really appreciated the presentation from all you guys, the contributions. I know personally, one of the things that I find stimulating and enjoyable is just hearing people's stories. And so being able to hear several different perspectives on a similar topic was for me very educational and informative. So once again, want to thank all of you guys for being able to be present today and for sharing your insights with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting us. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, they have our contact details and we can be found in the SOA directory. If there's anything people want to ask that and they don't feel they could ask in public, because saying you're about to leave your company to start your own business might not be always the best. But yeah, we're happy to take comments, questions afterwards by email and connect people with other resources if we can.
Sounds great. Thank you guys again.